I'm the Associate Dean of Graduate Studies and Research in the Faculty of Kinesiology and Health Studies. We're gathered here today on the traditional homelands of the Anishinaabe, Nehewak, Nakota, Lakota, Dakota, and the Métis Nation. This is part of the reconciliation research. Is part of that is sharing knowledge. So we're happy that you're here today to be part of this. So how this is going to work, we're going to have about 45 minutes for Dr. Candow for his presentation, then we'll leave another 15 minutes for questions at the end. So again, today we have Dr. Candow, who's a professor of kinesiology and health studies, and he's going to be talking about his work on creatine. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Candow for today's research seminar.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming. Hopefully you can hear me okay. So today we're going to talk about sort of an emergence on creatine. I think most people in here obviously have probably heard of creatine. Some people might actually be trying it. You will get to try it today if you like. But we're going to talk about some novel things from the neck up. So really important though, disclosure. I currently take creatine. I've been taking it for about 25 years daily. My liver and kidney is fine. We're going to talk briefly about that. I take a bit higher dose than you're probably expecting, at least 10 grams a day. I also consult for supplement companies who make creatine, so there's a disclosure. What I'm going to talk about today is evidence-based research. You'll see a lot of things from clinical depression to concussion, things like that, but it is important to disclose some of these entities. So if I've taught you before, I see some familiar faces in the class, or if you're taking human physiology or even going all the way back to high school biology, you may have heard of creatine. It's a nitrogen-containing compound created from 3 amino acids, so arginine, glycine, and methionine. So you can get it through food. We'll talk about the difficulty with that, but you may not know that you're actually making it right now while you're sitting here. In your liver, you're making a small amount, and new evidence to suggest that in the brain, we're actually making some creatine as well. So that begs the question, do you need the supplement? Okay, for the undergrad students in here, that's going to be part of the test later. Do you need to supplement? What if you're a vegan? What if you're a vegetarian or someone on a plant-based diet? Because it gets a little tricky. The only dietary sources of creatine, like not a supplement, are in animal-based flesh. Red meat, seafood, there's small amounts in poultry. And the last count is you would have to drink all the milk from a Jersey cow to get a small dose of creatine. So if you're consuming red meat or seafood on a daily basis, you're getting a small amount. You're synthesizing about 1 to 2 grams a day, and you also pee out about 1 to 2 grams. So the question is, do I need to take in more, or can I live a long, healthy life with a minimal amount coming from the diet? Hopefully there's not going to be additional tariffs as of tomorrow with 25% added to your food. But as we all know, purchasing red meat or seafood is super expensive. And then it comes down to your habitual dietary preference. So that's kind of what it is. If you can remember back to some of your classes, creatine basically maintains ATP. If you have more creatine in your cells, you can actually perform more work. So think of exercise. You can do more reps, you get stronger, you get an increase in recovery. Activities of daily living, getting out of a chair. So for example, older adults, sitting down, is it important for them to be able to get out of a chair with leg strength? It is. Off the toilet, out of bed. We don't really think of it, but these are some of the things that's actually starting to come into evidence-based research. Now here's the difficulty. To get a small amount of creatine is really difficult. In a landlocked province like Saskatchewan, it gets even more difficult, okay? So you can see here to get as little as 3 grams of creatine, so that's 1/4 teaspoon, you'd have to eat an entire kilogram of codfish. Okay, so that's about $30. If you want to get a little bit more from red meat, you go to the Keg or Golf's, whichever it is, a $50 steak will give you about 5 or 6 grams. So the difficulty becomes, can I afford it? Am I getting enough? And what are some other alternatives? So the idea is that it's a more practical or at least option to look at creatine supplementation, okay? There's many evolutionary perspectives from this. So one of the companies that I work for is kind enough to donate $100 boxes of creatine. I'm going to pass it around. It's kind of cool. It's in individual little packs, so you can open it up and take one. You don't have to take one if you don't want to. It's 5 grams per package. It's Creapure from Germany. It's third-party tested. Its purity is 100%, and there's no contaminants. So if you ever wanted to try it or you know someone that is, go ahead, take some. I have lots. But that's a form of supplementation. So one little pack there is equivalent to 2 salmon steaks or a large porterhouse steak. You can mix this in water. So you simply open up the little packet, put it in your water, and drink it. And we're going to talk about maybe for the exercising individuals how easy it is to do that, okay? So I think most of us are very familiar with creatine and muscle. I think 99% of the research, there's over 1,000 peer-refereed articles on creatine. It's clearly showing that it improves muscle strength, endurance, power, and muscle mass. But the evolution of research has really exploded from the neck up, okay? So our brain is very metabolically active, depending on what time you got up today. Some of you I know have a test. It's only about 2 kilograms, but it occupies about 20% of your metabolic rate. And now think of midterm week, final exams, when you're metabolically stressed. I'll talk about my jet lag. I just got back from Germany. How is creatine potentially maintaining cognition? So it's highly involved in brain bioenergetics, but to set the stage, it's really effective when you're stressed. And I actually don't know anybody on the planet that doesn't go through acute stressors. Poor sleep, your dog wakes you up all night, jet lag, university students cramming all night for a test. This is something to pay attention to. So the question is, can creatine supplementation increase creatine in the brain? If the brain uses this for fuel, just like your muscles do, and if our brain had more creatine, could we perform better? Well, going back to 267 and other physiology classes, I'm not going to bore you with too much detail. The problem with the brain is it has a protective force field, and that's called the blood-brain barrier. Our muscle acts like a Dyson vacuum. It sucks up all the creatine from our blood. Our brain says, wait a minute, I'm already making creatine. I don't want to necessarily take up what's coming from the bloodstream. So maybe those individuals that do not take creatine or eat it, such as a vegan, that's why they can form or maintain cognition healthily, because your brain is already making a small amount. Again, about 1 to 2 grams per day. The big limitation, if you remember back to neuroanatomy or even your anatomy classes, you probably heard of astrocytes, the most important glial cell. It acts as a filter, like a Brita water filter. The problem is it doesn't allow creatine to come into the cell because it doesn't have the transporter or doorway. So the brain will accept creatine, but it's really stubborn. Our muscles love it. Our creatine says, you know what, I make enough. I don't need you. Or are there times where the brain says, I need help. What I'm making is not enough. If you were to suddenly hit your head, that immediately reduces creatine stores in your brain. And think of anybody, athletes, have they ever hit their head? Just think about concussion, traumatic brain injury, and we'll talk about the evidence behind that. So this was one of the most elegant studies ever performed. It would probably rate in the top 5 of creatine. Creatine is the most researched ergogenic aid on the planet now. It's overtaken caffeine quite easily. And the elegancy of this is they use an MRI for the brain. So I'll put it in perspective. We don't have one here. There is one at the U of S in the vet college, but it costs about $3,000 per one person for the scans. So that's why these studies just can't get done. It's so expensive. But when you can measure brain creatine, it's 2 ways. A brain biopsy, most people don't volunteer for that, but you can go through a magnet and we can measure how much creatine is in there. There's only been about 10 studies worldwide that have this money and sophistication, and most come from Europe. But this was a really elegant study to simply show, can creatine get in our brain? And if it can, does it have therapeutic applications? The sample size was only 6. Again, the cost was astronomical. Taking 20 grams a day, which is a standard loading phase. I think most individuals in here, if they've tried it, say, hey, I read on these labels, 20 grams a day for 5 or 7 days. Is it effective? And it showed quite variation. But the nice thing is, in a sample like yourself, if you take a higher dose of creatine, it will accumulate. Now remember back 2 slides, we talked about if the brain has more creatine, energetics of the brain get enhanced. Think of your muscle having more energy. So this was quite interesting. They even did more elegance here where they looked at different areas, gray matter and white matter, and then they looked at areas of the brain that involved motor cortex, control, and balance. It was all increased, on average about 8%. Okay? So who in here would want an 8% increase in energy status in the brain? Likely everybody, okay? Especially university students, okay? Can the brain retain more information when you're pulling an all-nighter, when you have 3 exams coming up in the same day? Can your brain be more focused? What about two minutes to go in the World Cup Championship? Can Cristiano Ronaldo have more cognition to allow that individual to score or score himself? So there's a lot of potential application here. It's not just from a research perspective. There's been an explosion in this. We've tried to dabble in this quite often. You'll see that we've looked at a lot of reviews. A lot of research, though, comes from animal models, the mouse or the rat. And we now have an emergence in humans. But overall, you can see that the majority of studies that have looked at the magnet have shown an increase in brain creatine. But this is an important distinction. When you take creatine supplementation, you really get about a 20 to 40% increase in muscle levels. That's why individuals get bigger, stronger, faster. Again, the blood-brain barrier of the brain is preventing it. So you can see some people got a decrease. Other individuals got, on average, about a 4% increase. The idea here is that when you consume creatine or eat it, 95% go to your muscle. So that only leaves 5% to trickle into other areas such as your brain or bone. So that's why, in logic, do you need more, longer periods of time, or higher dosages to really accumulate? So that leads to the second question. Does the brain even need supplementation? Because what if you're a vegan? What happens? You can't get it through the diet. All the supplements are vegan-based, but what if you don't like supplementation? How are you going to get enough, or do you even need it? So this study was done out of Brazil. They also used the magnet. And for those in here, female especially, that are vegan, vegetarian, or on a plant-based diet, this is quite remarkable. They gave a very high dose just for 7 days. They wanted to see, could it get in the brain? And is there any differences between biological sex, age, and or activity? And this is interesting, and it sort of goes with what we think we already know. When we look at the amount of dietary creatine intake, vegetarians, minimal amounts. Trace amounts either from other food products. Omnivores, probably consuming 1 or 2 servings of meat per day. That makes sense. They're going to have a lot more. Okay, so keep in mind, vegans, minimal to no creatine coming in. But this is the good thing with the brain. Since it makes its own, there's actually no difference in brain creatine content between vegans and omnivores. So if you're on an omnivore diet, it's typically going to tissues below the neck. But the brain is so precious, it says, that's okay, we make our own. So for the vegans in here, don't start crying. Your brain is perfectly healthy. You're able to maintain a long and healthy lifestyle with that. I will let you know now that we're part of this Creatine Global Initiative where we're trying to get a DRI for creatine. If you're consuming less than 1 gram a day, it's leading to a lot of health abnormalities, especially in children. And who would have known that the most elegant research here is in pregnancy and fetal development out of Australia. It's quite phenomenal. And you wouldn't have thought that. It's usually for sports. But if you're interested, you'll look at all the health aspects of this. So there's a huge evolution. We just used to focus on the top left, primarily biological young males wanting to get bigger, stronger, faster. And now the totality of research has shifted. Only 5% of the current research, and again, this is the most researched supplement that a human can take, has moved from biological athletic enhancement to more health aspects. And today's focus is on the brain. We would all like this. Could it have applications for Alzheimer's, dementia, neurological diseases, students, professors, anybody? The goal is, can I have an improvement in memory? I don't remember what I ate for breakfast this morning. What's happening to me? Most people say that, where are my keys, things like that. So there's been a number of studies, and this is the number one variable we can assess because any lab can do it. You can do it on a computer screen, doing puzzles, asking questions, things like that. And I'm happy to report that 14 of the 18 studies definitely show an improvement in memory. And the greatest potential is when you're metabolically stressed. Write that down. You got exams coming up. This might help. We tried to do this study here at the university before. We just finished it at Northern Iowa, and I'm happy to give you the results soon. The caveats, though, it was interspersed with younger and older individuals, so think of the organ there, people who consume meat, habitual creatine versus not. So there's a lot of questions that still remain, but one of the main reasons I take it is to beg that I can get improvement in memory, or at least memory retention. Okay, the vast majority are showing that. And when you look at the meta-analysis, so when you've taken stats, individual studies are usually low sample size. So one of the strengths of a meta-analysis is to combine all the data to get a little bit more. And creatine, with and without exercise, is favoring memory enhancement. I wanted to show you this, though. We've also looked at data from NHANES, that's a national institute in the United States looking at self-reported data. And if you're consuming less than 1 gram per day, you get a reduction in memory. Okay, so go back to that table. How can I eat creatine or at least focus on it? If you don't want to, one of those packs a day is more than enough. Our case study is the way forward. A lot of people say, hey, I have this unique individual. What if we look at this? And this is a published study. I'll just let you read the title. The study blamed creatine for compartment syndrome. Is there anything else that might alarm you? Unless you think cocaine's okay, they didn't mention anything about cocaine use. They use creatine. So be careful when you're looking at an N of 1. It can have some connotations, so to speak. This is the most novel emerging area. I think everybody in here would pick this in their top 5 if they say, can this help with sleep? I have awful sleep patterns, like awful. And this is one of the main reasons I personally take creatine. So who cares? Well, essentially everybody on the planet would like to have more sleep, quality sleep, and longer duration, okay? So could this metabolite, without actually having the evidence behind it, have any potential applications for sleep? And then there's another form of sleep coming up. Everything from cognition to physical health, mental health, body composition, all the way down. So it's well documented primarily using the magnet and in rodents that when you have sleep, you're restoring brain bioenergetics. Sleep deprivation increases brain utilization. And in both humans and in animals, the brains of sleeping rats exhibit higher levels of phosphocreatine compared to sleep deprived. In other words, if you have the ability to get more creatine in your body, to get in the brain, could you sleep longer and better? You won't have to rely on caffeine to rescue the fogginess. That's the idea. So we just published this paper. This was out of the University of Idaho. We looked at biological young females, like a lot of the individuals in here, exercising university students, and we wanted to see using the Oura Ring, and they were working out using a tonal. It's a machine that you put on the wall. You did it at home. Exercising 2 days a week. Could creatine, about 5 grams a day, or the same amount in that little packet, have any beneficial effects? Interesting enough that the group who took creatine on the days they worked out, they slept almost an entire hour longer. So on average, something is happening allowing you to exercise and then speed up recovery for a longer period of time. We did not measure any mechanisms here, but I'm going to get to that. So think of maybe there's more creatine in the brain, which might have potential therapeutic applications. This is the biggest one. The most robust evidence comes from this. You could put a big picture of me here. Sleep deprivation. Poor night's sleep, you're waking up all night, you're stressed, you're tossing, turning. The most robust evidence comes from Europe and some studies in the United States of sleep deprivation. I think everybody would say, I feel sleep deprived. I rarely come across someone who says, I slept 10 hours a night, I'm no problem. Okay, everybody's busy. So this will probably be the paper of the year in the sport nutrition industry. It was out of Germany. It cost a fortune to do. But the reason it's going to be the paper of the year is they did MRS, which is the magnet, on a large population. This cost $50,000 just to do the scans. And they wanted to see, wait a minute, we've known these small dosages are good. What about a mega dose, right? Even more than the traditional loading phase. And these individuals were wakened and sleep deprived for 21 straight hours. They volunteered for it. They were kept up for 21 hours and then asked to do a whole bunch of cognitive tasks. Creatine actually increased creatine content in the brain, so that's number one. And then when it came to cognition and memory, the individuals who took a very high dose of creatine improved. Now, why is this landmark? The majority of studies show that creatine needs to accumulate in the body. It was the first ever study to show that one large dose can get into the brain and offset a night of sleep deprivation. Okay? So this has potential applications. It's the first study to show you can take small amounts, or God, if something's coming up in your life and you know you're going to be up for 48 hours, like flying to Australia, a higher dose might allow you to get past jet lag or maintain cognition. And this will be definitely in our area the paper of the year. How could it also influence other individuals longer term? This study was done by Terry McMorris, who's done the most with creatine and sleep deprivation. Here you go. College-age individuals. They looked at two groups. One group was taking about 20 grams a day for a short period of time compared to placebo. And then they measured a bunch of computer tests, puzzles, and self-report cognition. And again, when you look at the amount of sleep deprivation, 6, 12, and 24 hours, this is interesting. Taking as little as 20 grams a day, it only seemed to improve at the 24-hour mark. So this is phenomenal. For anybody in here under the age of 30, you're so precious. Even during hours of sleep deprivation, your brain is still strong. This is showing that only about the 24-hour period is when young individuals needed the creatine to come to the rescue. At 6 hours and 12, it didn't. So again, take advantage of how precious your brains are, study hard, things like that. Okay, there's a number of tasks that we can do. So this is interesting, and this is the study that my grad student, Blake Molding, was going to propose. I'm not sure what temperature is the warning. Can creatine offset mental fatigue? When do you feel mental fatigue? Every single day as a student. Every single day in your job. When we look at a higher dose of creatine, about 20 grams a day again, not only did it improve strength, but this is something for you to sort of put it in perspective. It improved memory and ability after a very daunting task. It's called the Stroop test. And do you know what the Stroop test is? It's on a computer. It's probably easy, but I'm going to sort of kill your brain right now. The Stroop test is this. All we ask you to do is come in on a computer screen, and we give you creatine or placebo before and say, this is what we want you to do. Already people's brains are like, wait a minute, this is not making sense. You need to read the color of the word and time yourself. So most people up here say yellow, blue, orange. Is that correct? No, what is it? What's the top line?
Red.
Green, red, blue. So just do that for about 10 seconds. You thought you were mentally fatigued now. It starts to hurt, right? You're like, oh, it makes it. They got these individuals to do this as fast as they could for 90 minutes straight. Just think about this. They weren't allowed to leave, not even use the bathroom, for 90 minutes. As a student, you're like, that resembles studying for final exams. Can this intervention have any beneficial effects? And if it does, that might have applications for you students. So remember, I want you to do this for 90 minutes today and see how you feel, right? You're going to lose your mind. But it has those beneficial effects. It improves cognition and memory after that. So who cares? Like if it gets in the brain and has some effects, does it matter? Well, we think it can, especially for exercising individuals or individuals that are in the normal population. Look at the amount of attention and focus a lot of elite athletes we see often. NFL is famous for this. An individual will go up, crawl on the back of someone with one hand and catch the ball, and know they're going to get hit by a train when they land. It's amazing focus and acuity. Does it have other applications? I just mentioned jet lag. You know when you get off a long plane and you're foggy that day and you're having coffee and you're like, I can't sleep, I don't know what time zone I'm in. What about you as a student? Staying up all night when we tell you not to? 3, 4, and I know this because when I go on UR courses, I can see you when I get out of bed, you're still up, right? It's not good. Sleep deprivation, not feeling the best. When your flu-like symptoms, I had COVID 3 times, it wreaked havoc on my sleep. Could it have helped? We've done one study on long COVID, and it can. And then what about night shift? I think of pilots. When I flew to Munich, we went overnight, and there's a pilot, 3 of them, that got us there. And I'm like, you better have enough sleep to fly the plane overnight. I'm trying to sleep. You got to make sure nothing happens. So you can see the applications here where this could have some beneficial effects, and the emergence is coming in. I'm not an expert in clinical depression, but there's phenomenal researchers in Utah, they're psychiatrists, have now looked at the potential of this because one of the common denominators with clinical depression and anxiety is that these individuals have a reduced amount of creatine in the brain. So the idea is if we could bring those levels back up to baseline, that's good, but what if we could give them a little bit more? Okay, so these studies, and there's a lot of reviews, if you have a term paper coming up, this is an easy one to research, and I think if you have an interest in this. And this is interesting, again, going to if you're consuming less than 1 gram of creatine per day, it's been correlated with a heightened increase in depression. So there's something in this metabolite that's maintaining brain bioenergetics or having some of the mechanisms. I want to focus on this paper because it was so elegant. Now keep in mind, these were individuals with clinical depression, and they were on methamphetamines. And the reason they take those is because they usually have such low self-esteem and heightened depression that when you take a narcotic such as methamphetamines, it overrides some of those negative feelings. Not a single study has ever shown that this nutrient could ever replace medication. And what I'm about to show you, if you know someone on medication with depression, please don't say you can stop medication. That's not what we're saying. But this study was done out of Utah, and it was quite elegant as well because when they gave individuals with clinical depression who were taking other medications, creatine monohydrate for as little as 5 grams a day for 8 weeks, it did increase in their brain. Okay, so there's no interruption with medication. But this was quite interesting. When you look at an indication of depression scale, in these individuals, you can see that when they started to take creatine, depression came down, and they did the MRS again on the brain. When they stopped, those symptoms of depression went up. So there's something in this nutrient that's actually having some therapeutic effects to brain biology. When they also looked at a Hamilton index for depression, when the individuals initiated creatine, it came down below clinical detrimental effects. When they stopped, it started to go up again. They're not knowing what they're taking. So we're hopefully having this brain bioenergetic effect. When you look at anxiety, the exact same thing. Creatine was initiated, statistically significant difference. When you stopped taking creatine, anxiety went back up. And again, it had the same effect on the scale. Okay, so this is something that is having application for brain health in clinical populations. There's been another study that just recently came out with cognitive behavior therapy. Again, when you add creatine to this, the nice thing with this, it was a low dose, 5 grams a day, equal biological sex, and actually have a better effect on self-efficacy and some of the abilities decreasing depression there. So I'm never going to say that creatine should take the place of medication, but it's just adding to the treatment modality. There's no adverse effects whatsoever. So there's potential of many aspects above the neck. How does it work? There's some good cellular data, primarily in rodents, but obviously we think this can have applications in humans. Creatine has now been shown in animals to act as a neuromodulator and a neurotransmitter. So for those that I've taught, you remember when you get to the end of the axon, you have acetylcholine. Creatine can act like acetylcholine and cross any of the synapse or the other types of areas and sort of take the place of serotonin and dopamine. So it's actually allowing individuals to have more potential energy or inhibitory factors. If you're interested in this is a fantastic paper. It's open access. It gives you all the mechanisms of how this metabolite can have some beneficial effects. Other mechanisms, again, using the mouse model, BDNF, if you've taken Cam's classes, motor control, or anything going back to anatomy, it's a protein that's derived to increase neuroplasticity. And then a good colleague of mine in Norway has now shown that creatine reduces a marker of neuronal damage. So these neural light chains are an indication of damage. So if you have a reduction in this, it indicates that the brain bioenergetics is more preserved. So there is emerging mechanisms. It's not just anecdotal, which is very, very nice. What about the big one on traumatic brain injury or concussion? We had hoped this would blossom a little bit more, but it's very difficult to do. So if you go back here, not good. Could this individual have taken creatine before you get hit in the head? Could that offset any of the detrimental effects? And alternatively, once you get a concussion, could it speed up recovery? That is massive trillion-dollar industry from the athletic community, NCAA, NFL, so on and so forth. Patrick's not here. I'll send him this article, but these individuals have a lot of good ties with the National Football League retirees, and this is very sad. They're now thinking it's linked to CTE. So reduction in creatine in the brain is now being linked to a precursor for premature mortality. It clearly shows that a number of indications of impaired brain bioenergetics are linked to low amounts of creatine in the brain, probably because all the head trauma. Every time the head is being hit, creatine is being turned over. The mechanisms are multifactorial. We're not going to spend the next 7 hours here, but I just want to highlight everything in red from the symptoms and mechanisms of head trauma is where creatine has a role. If you want to get this paper, just message me. I can give you to it. It's an exceptional paper looking at the mechanisms of how we think this might have beneficial effects. And of course, we have to use the animal model to really bring it home. They're cute, but again, we can't do this in humans yet, so we'll use the mouse and the rat. Again, another really cool study here where they gave these little critters either placebo or creatine for 1, 3, and 5 days before they were sacrificed with a self-induced concussion. Can't do this in humans yet. I don't think our ethics board would say, okay, volunteer, we're going to give you a concussion, but we can do it in the animals. And this was interesting that the cortical damage was significantly reduced at days 3 and 5. In other words, when the animals took more creatine for longer, they had a significantly reduced amount of cortical damage compared to just taking it for 1 day. Okay? So I think it's, for me, in my opinion, it's nonsensical if you're involved in any contact sport not to be taking this as a safety net. Because there's no downside. And if you're involved in football, soccer, or anything, this is something that has no adverse effects, but it might help speed up recovery or decrease the amount of damage. I think of NFL quarterbacks. And also, when you look at the rat model, when they gave the rats creatine for 40 days or placebo, and then they were sacrificed 7 days later with concussion, the individuals who took creatine had a 50% reduction in damage. So it's a preventative measure, and then when you get a concussion, it might speed up recovery. Who would this have application for? Well, what about children? They fall all the time. They're the population that breaks their arms so much. And the only study to date was in Scotland in children. When they suffered head trauma, they were immediately taken to the hospital, and they were put on a very high dose of creatine. 0.4 grams per kilogram, so about 20 to 25 grams. Again, this is a therapeutic trying to save their life. Car accident, whichever it is. And then the individuals were assessed for 3 and 6 months later. And these children, remember, their brains are in repair mode. They got an improvement in self-efficacy with headaches, self-care, speech pathology, compared to the poor children who did not. So there's something there saying that when the brain is stressed, it's begging for help. So stay tuned for this, obviously, as we unfold. But I love this slide, because who would have benefited from maybe having more creatine in their brain before they got hit? Best hockey player in the world. Is still in Pittsburgh, by the way. Could he have maybe played 3 or 4 more years at the highest level? If you know the name Eric Lindros, Brett Lindros, Pat LaFontaine in NHL. They've all retired early to concussions. Our Rams. Any of our sport athletes, to me, it's criminal that they're not considering this because they're going to get hit in the head, and this might help offset the negativity of it. Heading in soccer, children, older adults falling. There's no downside. If anything, there's potential. But there needs to be a lot more research, obviously, looking at all these. Look at the UFC. This is unbelievable. Or there's a new thing with slap. I can't even watch it. People stand there and let someone slap them as hard as they can in the head. I mean, come on. Other areas, let you know, ALS, Lou Gehrig's, there's no research. Duchenne muscular dystrophy is having enormous promise. There's been 2 studies in young boys with muscular dystrophy, and it seems to have some promise with muscle and bone, so that's something that's very interesting. There's some mixed evidence on Huntington's and Parkinson's, but the sample sizes are so low that you can't make conclusive diagnosis. Whenever you do a study in clinical populations, the end sample size usually needs to be over 200 because the amount of treatment effect needs to be so high. MS, unfortunately, we've talked to Cam, we're still doing it. We don't see a lot of promise here. There's a study that started now at the University of Kansas with Alzheimer's, and then we're starting one in northern Iowa in a couple months with those diagnosed with clinical dementia. So we're hoping young people are great, but if we could have one hope for neurological diseases, I think it's something to at least consider. So I love this graph from a good colleague of mine. It sort of paints the picture of what we're trying to do. It's not a miracle, it's not a cure, but if you look at a preventative strategy, here you are here looking at your brain creatine stores in the brain, you get hit in the head, concussion today, you weren't paying attention, whatever, metabolically stressed, you have 3 tests. If you have a little bit more and then your brain is working overload, it's just going to bring those levels back to normal standards. Unfortunately, though, when you have a little bit less and you take supplementation, it might just bring you up to those areas. Or could it get you up to a reserve? Okay? Like if the NFL and Major League Sports, they're not considering it or heard of it. I've been now contacted by the U.S. military. I'm like, why is the military in the U.S. contacting me? They're so focused. They have $1 trillion budget because they want their fighters and pilots to be more cognitively effective. I got a call from the Tampa Bay Lightning. There are individuals that are getting concussed. So it's now starting to become very prevalent, not only for the gym goer, but a lot of health applications. So in summary, creatine supplementation, it can increase brain creatine levels. 10 to 20 grams a day, if you want to take it at a high dose, can get in there quick. If you want to take a smaller dose, that's a couple salmon steaks for several months. It shows the most promise when you're metabolically stressed. So I'll preface this way. If there's someone in here who says, I sleep, I have a phenomenal diet, I don't have any stress, you're not going to notice any of the effects. But if anybody says, wait a minute, I do have stressors coming on in my life, this is something to consider. We don't have time, the 9 hours, to talk about the benefits on your immune system, bone, and muscle. If I've taught you before, you've heard of it, this is the new emerging area. The optimal dosing protocol is still unknown. We're trying, but it takes a lot of money to do these. 2 grams versus 5 versus 10. Is there a threshold? Do we need more? Do we need less? But I've sort of given you an overall estimate here. I think for sleep, 1 of those little packets per day will eventually trickle into the brain, piece of cake. If you're eating salmon, seafood, or red meat, you're getting a little bit amount. If you have severe mental fatigue or trauma in your life, you probably need a bit more, okay? If you've suffered a concussion, if you're not sleeping, whatever's going on in your family life, I always sympathize with my students. Some people say, I have 3 tests today. Did you go to sleep? I haven't slept in 36 hours. I got 2 Monster energy drinks going 24/7. This might help, okay? We don't know if there's a correlation between higher grades, but that's something that we're gonna look at. Depression as it currently stands, about 5 grams a day can get there. So again, it's not a massive dose. If we were talking about protein here, it's 200 grams a day. This is a very small amount. We've argued in a recent paper, does 1 dose of creatine fit all? It's difficult to extrapolate, but from a whole body perspective, 10 grams seems to hit all the facets. And that's why I take 10. So the evolution of dosing went from 2 to 3 grams a day. 10 seems to hit brain, muscle, bone, and the immune system. Can you take higher amounts? Yes, there's no adverse effects. And we put out this elegant paper in Sports Medicine. The impact factor is 12, so it's the 3rd highest, because they were really interested in what are the potential clinical applications of creatine. This is an open access paper. You can Google it if you like. We've looked at everything from cognition to different neurological diseases. And of course, just as important, is it safe? And this is one of the biggest questions we get all the time. Is it safe? We've sort of just come back from a conference in Germany for 4 days. We talked about the health aspects. For the females in here, if you're interested in pregnancy and fetal development, just Google this. It's quite phenomenal, the molecular research. But this study, and for those that publish, it's 18,000 pages long. So this is mind-blowing that it's in review. The paper's 18,000 pages long. And we looked at over 25,000 individuals who took creatine, on average 12.5 grams for over 60 days. For up to 14 years, there was no greater adverse incidences, especially on the liver or kidney. The only side effect you might get from creatine is if you take a lot at first, you might get a bit of water retention, and then it goes away. I I want to thank you for your time. If you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them now or follow up. But hopefully you get a bit of new information that it's not just to get bigger, stronger, faster, some applications for the neck. So thank you so much. And if there's creatine, you can go ahead and take it. We got lots downstairs.